Hey everyone, just wanted to announce that I am now working with a small local company named People's Choice Companies LLC to sell merchandise and products on Etsy. Consider supporting me and the small company by purchasing stuff on the Etsy store. Link is in the description. I am also helping out with a GoFundMe, also by People's Choice Companies, linked to helping create projects for struggling people. Consider donating to help out with that. Link it will be also in the description. Alright, thanks. Now back to the video. Of all the Super Nintendo games in existence, very few games seem to have captured the imagination of pop culture as EarthBound, aka Mother 2, and for good reason. With its amazing story, amazing gameplay, interesting worlds of many secrets, awesome characters, and intense surrealism, EarthBound is a unique type of game with a charm and feel that very few games could ever hope to achieve. It is a type of game that had managed to capture the imaginations of many developers, bringing rise to a style of indie RPGs that have left a major impact on many players, such as the ever-famous Undertale and Deltarune, the Lisa trilogy, and many more. Not only that, but it's a game that I fell in love with when the game came out on the Wii U and 3DS Virtual Consoles in the mid 2010s, after years of wondering as to why it didn't come out sooner on the Wii's Virtual Console. And how could I not? However, this amazing game has quite a story to it when it comes to its development, one that tells a tale of changed ideas and a game that was ballooning out of control, both in terms of scale and budget, only for the final game to bomb in sales despite being a masterpiece. Well, at least in the United States. But still. Today on Beta Quest, we'll be talking about the beta and development of EarthBound, aka Mother 2. Development on Mother 2 began immediately after the completion of Mother 1 and was to be released on the Super Famicom, this time as a joint venture between Ape Incorporated, comprised of different members than the Mother 1 team and led by Shigesato Itoi, and HAL Labs, a smaller team led by Satoru Iwata, although Iwata and his team would be involved much later in development. At first, Itoi wanted Mother 2 to be a space adventure, wanting to expand the scope of the story beyond the confines of a single planet, although he eventually scrapped the idea after 4 months of working on the idea, seeing that the idea would be seen as cliché. Itoi wanted Mother 2 to be a game that could properly take advantage of the video gaming medium, wanting to make the game as like reckless wildness, with various unusual game concepts, as well as have the game evoke a myriad of emotions from the player, like distraught, humor, terror, and feeling like things are just pleasantly ordinary as well as appeal to people who weren't normally seen as gamers, like girls. To do this, Itoi would regularly discuss his ideas to the team in order for the team to come up with new ideas for the game, allowing for this reckless wildness, as he called it, to show through. He also wanted to take on a less conventional approach to RPG design compared to even Mother 1, wanting the game to be unique and not follow conventional design methods and ideas like that space thing, such as wanting to take on a more unique approach to world design and the HUD display. As part of this idea of a more unique approach to RPG design, Itoi decided to exclude an overworld field map in favor of having only the towns and pathways and areas connecting them together, wanting no discernible difference between the overworld and towns in the game, which allowed for the locations to be designed a lot more unique and meticulously crafted. Itoi also wanted to change how the health system worked, replacing the usual number counters for RPGs, with his first idea being to use pachinko balls that would fall off the counter when a player got hurt. While a nice idea at first, the concept fell apart when players got an extremely large amount of health, so it was decided that the game would use a rolling counter instead, which, although similar to the usual RPG numbers, would actually give players ample time to recover from particularly violent attacks that would otherwise kill the player in other RPGs. Another unusual idea was to incorporate psychedelic backgrounds, referred to as video drugs by Itoi, and over 200 of those video drug backgrounds were made, all handled by a single person for over 2 years. On top of that, and wanting the game to emulate regular life, well, for the most part, not only was the game to be written in the kana script to emulate ordinary conversations between people, but parts of the game were also inspired by events in Itoi's life, such as the miners in a desert being based on executives from a Japanese construction company. The most infamous of this was the concept of Gaigus, or Gigu, in EarthBound Beginnings, which was inspired by the traumatizing feelings Itoi felt when observing a very graphic and upsetting sequence in the end part of the movie The Military Policeman and the Dismembered Beauty. On a less intense note, the game would also incorporate personal touches from the developers during the game's beta testing stages, which is cool. In terms of the music, development for the music was easier than it was in Mother 1, due to the higher number of samples that could be used, and it should be noted that John Lennon's music was a great influence for the composers when developing the game's soundtrack. Although, in maybe an ironic sense, the music's infamous use of samples from and similarities to well-known American songs is often considered a reason behind the game's minimal releases over the years. Well, at least in the West, but still. Unfortunately, unlike Mother 1, which went mostly okay and lasted about 2 years, Mother 2 suffered development hell, lasting 5 rough years, and there were even moments where Itoi felt that the project was doomed to cancellation, of course. Part of the reason was that the game dealt with technical situations that were causing development to not only take much longer, but for the game's size to balloon out of control. The game was originally supposed to fit on an 8 megabit cartridge, but due to the large amount of music that was composed for the game, the size tripled to 24 megabits in the end. But considering that cartridges were expensive to produce at the time, this wasn't really the most pleasing thing. The game was also using programming techniques that, although could allow for some impressive graphics, animations, and interesting gameplay mechanics, would take much longer to program and were harder to work out. These factors were what led to the game taking so long to develop and nearly got the project cancelled, although thankfully, the project was saved with the involvement of HAL Labs producer and future Nintendo president Satoru Iwata, who managed to steer production back on course towards completion. With Iwata's help and his team from HAL Labs joining the project managed to get course corrected back on track for its August 1994 release in Japan, to tremendous reviews and decent success. Now, before I move on, I want to talk about the various beta elements of EarthBound, as there's a decent amount of beta footage and pictures to go over. Although, even then, there isn't a whole lot to talk about. I know that sounded a bit like an oxymoron or something, but still. In the various bits of beta footage, we can see that Ness doesn't have a backpack on, which would be changed to him having one in the final version, which is cool. We can also see that the game was going to feature animations more like Mother 1, with a lack of diagonal sprites for diagonal walking. I guess it's cool that they added the diagonal sprites. Several screenshots showcase different looking placements of items and objects, as well as some cruder graphics for the game, which is to be expected. Perhaps more interesting is that originally the Mother 2 logo was animated, with a spinning earth and more dazzling logo effects, which were tragically removed in the final version. Moving into the game's unused code and content, we can see some pretty unusual things here, such as some unused graphics of your dead party along with Everdread, which could mean he could have been playable at some point. There's also these graphics for King climbing, King being your dog, which could suggest that he could have been playable for a little longer, which I would have liked. Would have given me a better reason to have named the dog, but whatever. There is also this unused capsule thing, which resembles the capsules found in Mother 1. And speaking of, there's some unused Mother 1 remixes found within the game as well, which go unused for some reason. There's also these other unused graphics, but there's really nothing too major about them, to be honest. We also have some unused enemies, such as a clone of Captain Strong named Crooked Cop, who is basically just Captain Strong with a different name, and the Magic Butterfly as an enemy, which is interesting. Maybe we could have dealt with evil magic butterflies, or maybe this was just an error. I don't know. We have a few unused items, such as the video relaxant or video drug. Maybe this could have instigated hallucinations that would have used those weird backgrounds. You know, I think I know why this got cut. There's also temporary goods, which seems to have actually been a key to the elevator in the Monotoli building that would have been given in exchange for the yogurt dispenser. And on a final note, there is a prototype of EarthBound, which was discovered and dumped in March of 2020. But aside from graphical differences and the game being quite glitchy, there isn't a whole lot to talk about with it. But anyway, on to the American release. After Mother 2's Japanese release, it was time to give EarthBound to the Americans. As in, just get the game released in the United States. I mean, it did decently in Japan, and Nintendo did want their own RPG series, so let's see if we can make EarthBound work this time. Originally translated by Dan Osen. Osen? Is that how you pronounce it? Sorry if I mispronounced it. He will be replaced by Marcus Lindblom when Osen, I'm going to say that, was assigned to another project about 10% into the localization process. Although Lindblom would credit Osen with the game's more iconic lines, such as Fuzzy Pickles. For a localization process, Lindblom would work with Japanese writer Masayuki Miura, sorry if I mispronounced that, who translated the script and contextualized the tone, and was given massive liberties by Nintendo to make it as weird as he wanted, with them wanting the game to be able to appeal to an American audience better, more so than a direct Japanese translation. Although Lindblom would find this to be a positive experience, he did state that the localization was difficult, as he had to localize an outsider's view of the United States, as he put it, for American audiences, and still maintain Itoi's vision, which was made more difficult when he never got to even meet Itoi. The localization process would be very extensive and intense, with the team working long hours, having to not only make the game work for American audiences, but remove things that could cause problems both in terms of copyright and cultural issues, such as removing the Red Cross, a Coca-Cola looking logo, potentially offensive imagery, removing alcoholic references, among many more. The extensive localization process as well as making sure the game was still playable after these changes, would take several months, resulting in a May 1995 release. Although, on a more positive note, Lindblom would rename one of the characters in the game Nico, in honor of his newborn daughter, to which he took a day off to be with her, which is cool. The game would be released, as mentioned, in May of 1995, although unfortunately, despite the game's positive critical reception, the game's Western release was a gigantic failure and wouldn't even be released in Europe until years later, due to the Super Nintendo not having much time left in the region and the bad North American sales. Prior to the 1995 release, the game received a $2 million advertisement campaign, with a considerable amount of money going into the infamous "This Game Stinks" magazine advertisement. As part of Nintendo's Play It Loud campaign, the advertisers decided to lean into the game's sense of humor by incorporating a scratch and sniff advertisement in gaming magazines, where players could scratch the barf image and smell the stink. It was an advertisement campaign that completely blew up in its face, not only resulting in loads of complaints from unhappy readers about the campaign, but also providing a bad image for EarthBound that killed any potential success in North America. Well, at least financial success. It didn't help that EarthBound's price was higher than most Nintendo games as well, due to the larger cartridge that included a battery, a problem that EarthBound Beginnings coincidentally had as well. So yeah, EarthBound's Western release was a failure. But this doesn't mean that EarthBound was going to be forgotten. No, far from it. Following the tragic cancellation of Mother 3, aka EarthBound 64, a subject for another day, fans of EarthBound were scared that this would be the end of EarthBound forever. But not so, as it turned out that Ape was working on a new GBA release of Mother 1 and Mother 2, titled Mother 1 Plus 2. Developed as the rebirth of the Mother series on the GBA, fans rejoiced despite some criticism of the promotional material focusing heavily on Mother 2 and practically ignoring Mother 1, with further rejoice when it was announced that Mother 3 was in development. Unfortunately, despite implications, the Mother 1 Plus 2 compilation would not be released in the West, foreshadowing the Japanese exclusivity of Mother 3, but this didn't mean that the games were to be permanently stuck in the 20th century, although there were some oddities. With the rise of the Wii's Virtual Console, in case you don't know what that is, that was the Wii's emulation service thing where you could play old games on it. Fans were hoping to see EarthBound on the service, as it seemed like an obvious choice. A Nintendo first-party game that is a fondly remembered classic. How could this go wrong? Unfortunately, it didn't get released on the Wii Virtual Console, and it was never really revealed as to why this didn't happen, although speculation arose that Nintendo was struggling with sorting out copyright issues with all the music samples and potentially infringing imagery. Although Marcus Lindblom would state that Nintendo probably just didn't know that there was a large demand for EarthBound to be re-released in the United States, which is likely. Whatever the reason was, fans were distraught that the Wii Virtual Console release for EarthBound wasn't happening, and they were begging for this game to just come out again. It was around this time that, due to the rise of YouTube, gaming websites, and nostalgia gaming, EarthBound would have its cult classic status practically cemented, with the game being held up as this unsung legend of video gaming and the ultimate titan of the SNES gaming library, comparable to that of Trials of Mana. I mean, EarthBound was already a cult classic, but the late 2000s and early 2010s would be when this status was set in stone. It was also due to this, as well as many 1980s and 1990s gamers who grew up with EarthBound that became adults, that we started seeing indie developers develop their own projects inspired by EarthBound, since it was so awesome. And practically since the series was just done with Mother 3. This is how we got games like Undertale, Citizens of Earth, Lisa Trilogy, and many more games, which is pretty cool. But then, something amazing happened. 2012, eToy announces that a re-release of EarthBound was happening. It was going to happen. And then, April 17th, 2013, during a Nintendo Direct, EarthBound was announced as a release for the Wii U's Virtual Console. Fans rejoiced that finally, the cult classic of the Super Nintendo would make its grand return to the public conscience, which it did later that year, with future releases on the 3DS Virtual Console, the Super Nintendo Classic, and the Switch Online service, along with EarthBound Beginnings a little while after. It was great that Ness and his friends would return to the public conscience after a decade of being pretty much not there, except for being in Smash Bros., which is still cool. But that was Mother 2, aka EarthBound. It's unfortunate that the Super Nintendo release was a complete disaster, as the game is an absolute masterpiece. It may not be perfect, but it was an excellent game with a lot of awesomeness to it. And it also sucked that the game took so long to be re-released on the Virtual Console, whatever reason that could have been. I remember wanting to play EarthBound so bad, but being unable to because it wasn't on the Virtual Console, and I didn't have a Super Nintendo, nor did I really know about emulation. However, I am glad that EarthBound, as well as Beginnings, finally got the re-releases they deserve on the Wii U and 3DS Virtual Consoles, as well as the Super Nintendo Classic and Switch Online stores. While I wish Mother 3 could get released in the States, I am glad we have Mother 1 and 2 again. But anyway, this is K-Steel with Beta Quest signing out. I will see you all later.
This was a Cobalt Steel video by MS Bernie. Like, comment, and subscribe if you liked what you saw. Until next time, see you all later.
No! God, please, no! No!